Hi, I'm Charles. I direct and own Kaleidoscope, Rock Academy Kaleidoscope School of Music here in the Seattle area. And this is a series of videos I'm doing about music myths, I'm calling them. Most myths have a element of truth to them, but the problem is they become generalizations that inhibit people's experience of music. So I'm doing a series to talk about my perspective on those things as a 30-year guitar and bass teacher and music school owner, and also a musician since 1979. This particular myth is the only reason to practice or to play an instrument is to get good at it. Now, that doesn't really necessarily sound like a myth, but we're going to explore why I think it is, especially as a generalization. A lot of these myths have to do with musical journeys. Like when you start playing an instrument, you set off on a journey, and it's going to have a lot of the characteristics of a journey and/or a relationship. Like I would definitely say that I have a sort of marriage to my guitar, having been a player for 40 years now. In talking about a lot of these myths, I've tried to look at like what are the problems or the consequences of believing the myth. So this one's obviously kind of powerful, because if you believe that the purpose of practicing or playing an instrument and taking lessons and all that is to get good at it, what happens if you don't? Now, of course, that sounds like kind of a dangerous thing to say as a music teacher if you're trying to sell people lessons and you say, well, can't guarantee that you're going to get any good at this. That sounds like a cop-out as a teacher. The problem is that people's perception of how they're learning is very subjective. It's not very objective at all. And we're all kind of locked in that subjectivity we have. And so I'll tell you a story of like two students, because it will illustrate kind of the consequences. So I had two students in the 90s that were adults, started playing as adults, hadn't played. I think one guy was the longshoreman in Seattle, had never played an instrument before, if I remember correctly, and the other one was a housewife from the Smash area who I think had played piano maybe. Both of them started out as beginners with me, and both seemed to have really a great interest in playing guitar and a really good eye for detail. I remember doing a lot of my most intensive transcriptions of folk tunes and finger picking tunes for this lady from Sammamish. And as I recall, they both took lessons for a couple years. What happened was, I think with both of these people, the guy in particular, is when they were beginners, they just gave themselves a pass. I'm not good at this because I just started. But after a couple of years, the nagging inner voice, I call it the inner critic, started saying, you've been playing for X amount of time, you ought to be X amount of good. That voice, which definitely did not evaluate their progress the same way I hope more objectively as their teacher, started basically saying really negative things to them about where they had gotten to, despite their investment in practicing. I think both of them were pretty good practicers. And I remember that with the guy, we kind of scaled it back at one point. He was getting really frustrated with not being able to get the more complex songs polished. So I dialed it back and said, well, hey, let's just do a core of more simple songs. And I remember him saying to me, look, if I suck at these simpler songs, then I must really be bad. So my strategy with him kind of backfired. But in the case of both of them, they stopped taking lessons. So the inner critic got the better of them, said you ought to be good, or this amount of good after this amount of time, and therefore, you're just going to not do this anymore. I don't want to deny anyone's reality by making this video or calling this a myth. If you are really disappointed in your musical progress and you don't want to continue, of course that's your choice, and I don't want to negate that. But I think there's a larger cultural thing going on in our modern culture where we, in the earlier, the pre-electricity days, you didn't have the option as much to, as an average person or average family, to consume, watch, buy, or listen to professional musicians. If you wanted to have music around your house, you had to make it yourself. So I think that there was more an idea that music is something everybody does. In the modern world, of course, especially now with YouTube and the internet, we can see the most extreme examples of people who are really good, especially at young ages, at playing instruments. And so we're bombarded with images and videos of people who are super technically adept from all over the world, the best of the best, or the outliers. And we also, obviously for decades now, we've been consumers of music. We buy music, we listen to music, we stream music. And so, our idea is they are musicians over there. They're super good at that. And the only way that I can do music is if I somehow kind of practice my way into some facsimile of that camp of professional musicians. And so I think there's like unspoken subconscious assumptions that we bring from our culture to our practice life or our decision to play an instrument. And it may be impossible to tease those apart, but I'm hoping that calling this myth and doing this video might help people see that. Here's the contrary assertion, which is the reason to play music is to enjoy playing music. Whoa. So, a really great example of this is when you study music, there is a mental activity going on that has nothing to do with your technical ability. So you're learning to listen to music differently. You're noticing what's going on in a song. You're learning what chord progressions look like. You're learning about what guitar layers might look like in a song. So hopefully that awareness is intrinsically interesting. You know, just being able to look at some of your favorite songs or your favorite bands with a new light should have intrinsic interest, whether or not you can play along to it. So I hope that people can start realizing that results come and go. Yes, it is true that if you invest in practicing over a long period of time, probably at 6 month to year intervals, if you compare your ability versus 6 months prior, you'd probably see development. But you're really not going to see it day by day. There are definitely plateaus in learning music. There's definitely like slight regressions. It can almost feel like as your brain is integrating new information, new skills. So practicing is very much like an investment in something out there. So the part that you should enjoy day by day is actually the doing of it, experiencing music, doing something that's different from what you do in the rest of your life, learning to listen to or see music differently, see your favorite musicians differently. That's the part that hopefully is rewarding in the here and now. The ability to play is something that's more like, you know, putting something in the stock market and hoping that it increases. My personal belief is that you consistently invest in something, an activity, your skills will improve even if the road is rocky. But if you focus more on the enjoyment in the here and now of just doing music, of experiencing something different, of feeling the sensations of playing, or of moving your fingers or singing, you'll free yourself a little bit from the tyranny of that voice that says you should be X amount of good right now. I'll address this some in my other myth videos, but there's definitely a long learning curve to really sounding great as a player. You have to invest for a while, and there's like a lot of this before there's little moments of, whoa, I sound better now. So I hope that people can kind of, you know, be aware that the culture is telling us a lot of times that the only valid way to do something is to do it a certain way or to be a certain amount of good. And we can kind of kick back against that a little bit by saying, hey, I just like doing this, so I can happily suck. It's not your business. So I remember reading a Reader's Digest article that addressed this back in the 90s in my first studio. You know, I think it was on the wall, actually, because I used to like tack everything to the wall. And it talked about how this lady was recounting how her husband decided for some odd reason he was learning to play the tuba, and he bought like this tuba used that looked like it had been run over at a garage sale, and he would just whip that thing out at parties and be like, hey, I'm going to play you all a song on the tuba. So the phrase in that article that stuck with me, and it probably inspired me being aware of this myth over time, was anything worth doing is worth doing badly. So that would be the ultimate protection against the possible harm of the myth that the only reason to do something is to do it well. So I hope this was an interesting exploration of that particular myth. Look for some of my other videos about learning and myths of music, and I really appreciate you checking out the channel. We'll see you next time. Thanks.